So I want to further explore the impossibility of the Harford's apartment in Eyes Wide Shut, considering namely the fact that every space you go to in their apartment has windows pointing to the outside, which have light or outside objects, buildings with other windows lit up that you can see. Now, thank you to one of the viewers who commented and told me that this is actually a building in Central Park West called San Remo, the San Remo Towers. So there's a world where the Harfords live in one of the two towers that are actually at the top of this giant kind of apartment complex. You don't see the towers in the film from either of the two shots that Kubrick shows us from the outside. You just see what looks like, regular kind of apartments that are built into the edifice, but not towering up in these singular kind of towers. So we could imagine that the Harfords live in the towers, like in one of the towers, even if they're at even if they're at the bottom level of the tower, or even if they're at the top level of the tower. It still doesn't work for me, because when we see them looking out of their windows, we see buildings that are, comparable in height to where they are in their edifice. So they are in buildings, they're in rooms in an apartment building where there are buildings surrounding theirs that are taller and that exceed the height of their, kind of visible, spectrum, looking outside of their windows, that is. So that lets me know that unless there are buildings that are taller than the towers, the San Remo towers there, then I'm just still not convinced. I think that the impossibility of the architecture is important because it indicates, it kind of emerges out of their very social and cognitive participation, as humans, their impossibility as a couple, as a family, as what they're trying to how they're trying to define themselves is reflected in the impossibility of their very architecture, the structure that within which they abide. So I think these things are reflective of one another. I think these things are, in a way symbiotic, ecological, as far as giving meaning to the narrative and to the individuals and to the people. I think that we look at the spaces and the places that we occupy, and there's a reason why we are there. We are either pulled, or we are pushed, or we are attracted to, or we desire that. Maybe sometimes we even get what we want. You're able to build the home you want and create the space and create the family and the entire story. Oftentimes this isn't the case. Oftentimes our narratives, in fact, are supplemented, complemented, deconstructed by others, by other people, other groups, other ideas, other places and spaces. And what we see is, even though Bill is kind of, singularly trying to pursue something, there's something inside of him that's trying to come out, that he needs to point to and touch and define and make sense of, and have that kind of reflect, his becomingness, right? Not only as an individual, as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a doctor, as a professional. And he's got this paradoxical kind of quality about him, where he's wimpy and simpy, and he's a punk, and he's a liar, and he's always occluding and hiding. He's always peeking around the corner. He's kind of watching out for himself. He's always kind of shifty. Yet he has this persistence and this kind of boldness. And I think I'm going to put forth a hypothesis that suggests that Bill, in a way, is the red cloak figure. I mean, obviously he's not, right? Because he's the other. He is invited into that space, or he goes to that space, and he's subjugated by the red cloak. But in a way, the red cloak reflects him. And in a way, I think when the red cloak looks at this guy, he's like, this little joker, man, he kind of reminds me of me. I think there's a potential and there's a world where Bill has the, potential, the capacity to become Red Cloak in a future world, to, aspire and to transcend the levels of power and leadership that he imagines that he wants to be a part of, But he's so simpy and wimpy. Like, he's not the alpha male, top down. Even even Ziegler's butlers are like, more masculine than him. I mean, maybe that's obvious, but like, these are not like necessarily powerful people. They're like workers, right? They're like laborers, they're henchmen. But they're like way more like appealing and masculine. And Nightingale, even Ziegler, like, however, Bill has this type of, drive, this ambition to attain and to achieve, some semblance of himself in a future world, in a future kind of, mode. Even, very coldly as he thinks about his wife and his daughter, very coldly, he's aspiring towards something. And there's a very real possibility that that Bill could become this the high and mighty kind of, esoteric, powerful, embodied, leader force that he feels like he can be. He kind of imagines that he can be it. I mean, how bold is he just to stand there when they first go to Ziegler's, party at the beginning, and he just stands there with his hands in his pocket as Ziegler flirts with his wife in front of him, and Ziegler kind of like emasculates him and kind of like pushes him around a little bit. Bill just stands there and takes it with a smile on his face. You're like, wow, this little joker, man, how's he going to do this? I digress. Part of the impossibility of that dichotomy, the paradoxical kind of, it is one thing and it is purporting to be another thing, yet it's not. It's neither of those things. This too is their home. Their home is supposedly a space where a family lives. There's a holiday, there's traditions, there's decorations, there's art. There's a lived-inness to every space in their room, in their home rather. There's stuff you see. There's like all kinds of stuff laying around, happening. There's drawings, there's art projects, there's old dolls, there's old shoes, old blankets. There's a lot of things going on there. There's a kind of lived-inness. However, there's kind of secret little doors and hallways, and like, where does this room go? And is it even possible? Like, if you were to go out there, the door that leads to the outside, it apparently, goes straight down a hallway, but if you're walking around, from the dining room to the kitchen, you see there's another a little tiny nook hallway that kind of leads down where that front door leads. So like, where does that front door actually lead to? Where does that little nook hallway actually go? Does it not interfere with that hallway leading to the outside? There's a little tucked, nook and door down a dark hallway that we could imagine leads to Bill's little nook with the pillars where he's staring out the window at the beginning, but we don't know. We can't see it exactly. And then, of course, there's Alice's impossible nook, which simply doesn't exist. It's nowhere in the home. And we also see Alice getting ready in the bedroom where she has a little mirror and a little vanity set, and she's got, her makeup and her books and a little chair. So maybe she would have both, both spaces. But then later we see her, getting dressed in a little nook area where she's like putting on her bra. And we can see there that there's no lamp in the corner. There's no tennis rackets. It's almost like a different nook again. So, one, they could live in the towers of the San Remo, which it's called in real life as the San Remo, which incidentally, there was a San Remo conference in the early 20th century. The final rulings and judgments were made that Israel could be its own nation state, and that those legalistic kind of determinations were being made there at the San Remo conference. And this was presented to Lord Rothschild, so there's a significant consistency here between the Rothschild, the rich and powerful, the super wealthy, the hidden forces that structure our economies and our politics, and the ways that we're able to participate socially. It's just interesting that their home, their apartment, is within that existing building that's named after that place and that conference and the ruling around Israel becoming its own nation state as such. Obviously given Ziegler, given the mansions, given, the rituals, and considering who is Harford. Harford is such a simpy, wimpy name, Is it a fake name? Is his name, has it been altered? Who is he? What's his actual kind of ethnic, origins, Bill, that is. We can imagine that Alice is in a kind of way Aryan, Scandinavian, some type of, considerable white, ness, maybe Anglo, maybe, Celtic. It's, it's hard to know, Nordic. But we can't really know Bill's kind of ethnic or genealogical heritage as such. And so how to make sense of his place in this larger world of Ziegler's and red cloaks and mansions and his aspirations to be high and mighty and rich and powerful, come into question. But that one, they either live in the tower of San Remo Apartments, and so they then could potentially have light coming in from every window on every side of the apartment. But two, why are there buildings that extend beyond the view from looking from within their apartment? They tower over the San Remo towers. Three, what about the impossible door outside of their bedroom? Where does that lead? Is it just a closet right there? Interesting place for a closet. What about the little hallway that leads to supposedly Bill's nook and his little door there? Why is he staring down? He looks down that hallway both times. When he comes home earlier, when he's got the cloak and the mask that he needs to hide in his little office, he just glances over there. It's like his habit. He always looks over there. What's he always looking over there for? Does Alice stand over there sometimes? She kind of hides over there and waits for him. What's he looking for? Does he think he sees something down that little hallway sometimes? Because later he looks and he takes a hard look. When he comes home and he's done. He's had it all. He feels totally wasted and guilty and confused, and he looks hard down that hallway. Maybe he's nervous about somebody jumping out. Maybe he's been snuck up on in the past. Maybe he's always kind of sticking his nose where he doesn't belong, and he's just kind of aware. He's looking for somebody to kind of come out of the dark. Could be. And if Alice's nook is impossible, and if she has a little vanity set in the bedroom where she sits and gets ready, what does that imply about the power dynamics of the family, of the husband and wife, the mother, father, the home? And we could extend these concepts beyond the actual immediate home and the actual human family. We could say, okay, what does this say about the nation state? What does this say about the nation family? What does this say about the larger social and political intersections, the economy, global politics? Like how are those inequities and problems being, metaphorically kind of represented in a family, in a couple who is at odds, who are trying to figure out if they're going to stay together, if somebody's going to have to die, what's going to have to be sacrificed in order, what's gained, risk analysis, cost benefit analysis of it all. But they're either in the towers, but I don't think they are, because of Alice's impossible nook, because of the buildings that tower above. There's some impossible architecture and doors and potential secret spaces within their home. It's interesting when Bill comes home the first time. He comes home twice, right? He comes home once after going to the party, and he's got the cloak, and he hides the cloak in his office. Before the first thing he does, he walks in, he goes to Helena's room, and he looks. Why does he do that? After he goes to the party, he gets found out, and he comes back home. First thing he does is looks in Helena's room and kind of looks at her for a second. Then he goes and he hides the stuff. The second time he comes home, after seeing the dead body, meeting with Ziegler, walking the streets, and he's just wasted. He's dumped. He doesn't go to Helena's room. He just goes straight to the kitchen, or he turns off the Christmas lights, he goes to the kitchen, and he drinks a beer, or he starts to drink a beer, and then we see him go to the bedroom to confess, etc. So why does he look at Helena's room the first time, but not the second time? And the first time he takes a look at Helena's room, and then he just glances down the little, mysterious hallway. Second time, he doesn't go to Helena's room, but he takes a hard look at the hallway. So just some more, ideas and problematics to wrestle with when we think about Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick, and the impossibility of the Harford's apartment. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. I can't wait to hear from you.